The A-7K Corsair II is the big prize from the 2023 Repair Factory crafting event in War Thunder. Is it worth the grind? Let's find out. The original A-7 Corsair II was a dedicated ground attack aircraft based on the airframe of the successful F-8 Crusader fighter. The A-7 was very much a product of the 1960s, having first flown in '65 and entering regular service in '67, and most of its technology was fairly standard for the time. I've covered the history of the A-7 generally in other reviews, but the A-7K specifically was a specially built two-seat combat-capable trainer version of the Corsair. The K was generally based on the D model and entered regular service in the early 1980s with the Air National Guard as their primary trainer for the A-7s that the Guard was inheriting from the regular U.S. Air Force at the time. Only a small number of these were built, only 30 or 31 depending on the source, with almost all of them used by the Air National Guard until they were retired in the early 1990s. One interesting use of the A-7K, alongside the A-7D, was its role as a conversion trainer for the F-117 Nighthawk and its use as a cover story decoy for Nighthawk pilots during the 1980s. Declassified sources indicate that between 1 and 3 A-7Ks were used in this role by the 4450th Tactical Group. Regardless of the exact number, this was the only use of the A-7K by an active-duty Air Force unit, and after the F-117 program was made public, the A-7Ks were all transferred back to the National Guard. There were no international users for the A-7K, but the Royal Thailand Navy had apparently expressed an interest in purchasing 2 of them in the 1990s, but the deal fell through due to cost concerns. In the end, the A-7K was a minor but still interesting chapter in the story of the A-7 Corsair II. What we get in War Thunder is the A-7K. This is the top air reward from the Spring 2023 Repair Factory crafting event. This is a strike aircraft in Rank 7 of the American Air Tree, with a battle rating of 11.0, and more on that later. The plane has a full ballistics computer for all of its air-to-ground weapons, and it can also carry a targeting pod that gives a FLIR camera, but no auto-tracker. The plane is supposed to have a radar set, but at the moment it's just got a placeholder that's modeled but non-functional. For loadouts, the A-7K gets a huge variety of rockets, bombs, gun pods, guided air-to-ground weapons, and sidewinders. However you like to fly out, this jet has you covered. Its air-to-air missiles are the AIM-9J and AIM-9L sidewinders. These are both great weapons, with the 9L currently being the best sidewinder in the game. The 9L has 30 Gs of pull and all-aspect targeting, combined with reasonable range. The 9J is a 20G rear aspect missile, but it's still useful as you're grinding upgrades for the plane. The jet also carries the GBU-8 TV-guided bomb. This is an excellent weapon that tracks well and carries a reasonably large warhead, and it can be very effective when it's dropped from high altitude. Lastly, it can take the AGM-65B Maverick anti-tank missile. This is a TV-guided weapon with a great warhead and reasonable range. Targeting can sometimes be a little tricky, but if you can land one of these on the target, it's usually going to be toast. Keep in mind that the stat card range is a little misleading, and realistically, you won't get hits past about 10 kilometers, and for best results, you want to be quite a bit closer than that. The flight performance of the A-7K isn't great. It's a heavy plane with no afterburner and a subsonic top speed. Like the other A-7s in the game, this jet has poor acceleration, especially at low speed, and its rate of climb isn't very good for a jet at BR-11. Add to this that its maneuverability is below average, and it's going to run out of energy really quickly in a prolonged dogfight. The A-7K is especially poor at vertical maneuvers in most circumstances, and realistically, you're only going to get 1 or 2 good energy turns out of it. The plane has combat flaps, but honestly, they don't help much. Now, You also want to keep in mind that if you've got any kind of bombs or ordnance under the wings, all of the plane's performance metrics get even worse. And if you're going in for a bombing run or something and you get jumped by an enemy fighter, strongly consider just ditching your bombs and abandoning the bombing run so that you'll at least have some weak hope of evading. But realistically, even with clean wings, it's going to be incredibly difficult to shake a dedicated fighter off your 6 at this BR. It's also worth mentioning that the plane is reasonably tough, but it can still rip its wings pulling high Gs coming out of a dive, so be careful with that. Overall, the flight performance of the A-7K just isn't competitive to other jets up at the top tier. Taking the A-7K into air battles can often be pretty lackluster. You're the slowest jet on the team, like by far, so everyone else is going to beat you to the battlefield. And unless by some miracle you get matched with a bunch of people with good teamwork, the F-4Ss are usually going to take out the ground bases before you even get halfway there. Sometimes you'll luck out and get into the fight just as the bases respawn, but usually you'll just be left cleaning up, surplus AI ground units that nobody else bothered with. In terms of using the A-7K for air combat, well, you've got a pair of AIM-9Ls, and it has a gun with a great rate of fire combined with plenty of ammo. So if people head on you, it's a bit of a fair fight. But if you get sucked into a turning dogfight against like a MiG-29 or a Viggen, it's probably not going to end well for the Corsair 2. Now, close air support in ground battles would seem like it's the natural habitat for this plane. And it is, at least on paper. The A-7K has access to a high quantity of TV-guided weapons that are pretty effective. But here's the thing. The Pantsir S1 exists, and you spawn inside of its kill zone. With something like the Tornado or Mirage 2000D, this is a challenge, but it's not a show-stopping problem, since those jets have the engine power to back climb right after spawning in and try to set up for an attack run, or otherwise escape out of the way at the start of the match right after they spawn into the battle, right? Well, with the A-7K, you just don't have that engine power, and even if you turn around and or dive immediately after spawning in, you can still get wrecked by the Pantsir before you can get away from it. And to make matters worse, its primary firing mode doesn't even trigger a lock warning on your radar warning receiver, so you won't even know that you're under attack. I don't mean to sound whiny here, and if you've watched more of my reviews, you know that I try really hard not to. But in the current meta, the A-7K is hard countered by an increasingly common opponent vehicle. And I mean like paper beats rock type of hard countered, because it doesn't even have the agility to dodge the incoming missiles if you're carrying any kind of ordnance, and that's even if you see the missile coming. If you can spawn into a match without any Pantsirs up, or if they're all like distracted by helicopters or something, the A-7K's TV-guided weapons are perfectly capable of doing some massive damage, but your ability to use the plane for close air support is unfortunately going to depend 99% on whether or not one particular type of SPAA unit is spawned in on the enemy team. Visually, I really enjoy the look of the A-7K. Hunchback planes like this always look cool to me, and the double cockpit plus that refueling port on the spine just give this jet a weird stubby look that I think is great. Plus, you can get 3 different paint jobs for it, all of which look excellent. A+ on the visuals and detailing for this one. Landing the A-7K isn't too difficult, and you can safely drop gear and flaps right at around 400 kilometers an hour. You'll want to keep the throttle up until you're committed to touching down though, as this plane is still very heavy even without any ordnance, and if you get below a safe glide slope, it's possible to crash out at the last second. No landing chute either, so expect pretty long landing runs. You get an arrestor hook, but you'll probably never get the chance to use it. The cockpit on the A-7K is wonderful. The visibility is really good, especially for a tandem 2-seater, and all of the instruments are in good spots, and you get a map display a TV display, and a visible radar warning receiver right in my favorite spot. Overall, this is an excellent cockpit, and it's a joy to fly in VR. To close out on the A-7K event vehicle. This jet gets an amazing selection of air-to-ground weapons, has an adequate supply of countermeasures, has enough bombs to take out 2 bases in air battles, and it's an event vehicle, so you can get it for kinda free-ish? However, it isn't fast, but it sure is slow. It's not especially maneuverable, and its meta at 11.0 is absolutely brutal. The final verdict on the A-7K is that this is a great plane, my favorite version of the A-7 in the game, no question. But its BR is simply too high. It should be at 10.7. And right now, both the air battles meta and the close air support meta stack the deck against this jet in different ways. It's a lot of fun, but expect a major learning curve if you haven't flown subsonic strike jets at the top tier before. As always, thanks for watching.